allowing someone to feel free to be themselves around you is empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so important. And one of the again Jewish concepts that I love is this idea of hakarat hatov, which is like celebrating the good or recognizing the
Yes.
good. And I think improv can be a great way to practice finding the good in
Yeah.
things, because when you're creating an improv scene, when you're coming up with things from scratch, there isn't really the time to focus on what's not working. You just have to be searching for what is working,
Yes.
right? In our lives, we spend a lot of our days, a lot of our times at work and at home talking about this meal was terrible, I didn't like this, this movie was terrible, waste of my time. But if we have the improv mindset, we have to be looking for what works. Because if we're doing an improv scene, we don't have time to pause and be like, oh, this joke isn't working or this relationship isn't working. We have to just be looking for what is working. What's the little nugget that's working? And so I think if we take that, absolutely. I think we all often try and do too much when we're speaking or writing.
Yes.
One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes is, and he has many, but was him writing to someone and saying, "I'm sorry this letter is so long, but I didn't have time to make it shorter." And that acknowledges to me what's true, right? Which is that it's like easier to write 10 pages than it is to write 10 lines that convey that idea. That actually takes a lot of effort, right?
And
to
thought,
to
and
get to
yes,
get
and
that
to
succinct.
slow
Yeah.
down and be able to properly articulate what you're feeling and what you desire out of the conversation in general allows
Yeah.
you to be present in the moment and actually respond in the way that you'd like to. Welcome back to this episode of How Do You Divine? And today we're here with Andrew Davies, and we are ready to explore the word empathy. Andrew, thank you so much for coming to the podcast and just making time to be here and be a part of this. Who's Andrew?
Who is Andrew? Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about empathy, and hopefully we'll be talking about each other and
Yeah.
other people, because that's what empathy is about, and less about me. But to tell you a little bit about me, I'm Andrew. I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, and my life is really about using improv and theater as a way to build connections and help people be their best selves and be their best communities. So I help run an organization called Artly Working, which brings improv to the workplace. We've visited over 100 companies, big ones that like Netflix and Roblox and Meta, and lots of smaller tech organizations as well, and using improv as a way to build stronger teams, happier people in that context. And I also co-run a group called the Bible Players, which is a educational Jewish comedy team that uses improv and theater as a way to connect with Jewish stories and Jewish values. And so those are my main passions, and I'm really excited to be here and talk about empathy
I
and
love
everything.
that. Thank you so much. And one thing when we first met that really stood out is how you have been able to combine your passions along with your purpose and really are out there in the world, making an impact, not only in corporate spaces, but also for children in their younger years. Can you remember in your younger years the first time you came into a situation or a conversation with a friend that made you realize, like, maybe I'm a bit empathetic, or that was an empathetic moment? Because I think often when we think about what is empathy, we don't necessarily know how to pinpoint the definition outside of obviously the dictionary, right? But it's like, what is that empathetic feeling or moment that really stuck with you early on that made you feel like, I do love people and I want to do more?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's so many moments growing up where you feel a connection with other people, you feel differences, and you appreciate those differences. I think I'm thinking about moments of really that. I mean, for me, theater has really been a place where I think, built a lot of empathy. And I think one of the beautiful parts about being a performer and an actor is that you get to step into other people's stories and tell their stories and really try to understand where they're coming from and their mindset and their loves and hopes and fears and dreams. And it allows you to really play with that. So, my first real big acting performance was in fifth
Nice.
grade. My teacher did a show with our whole class, and the audition process was just that she gave us a note card and she said, write down if you want a big part or a small part, and singing or non singing. And I kind of thought about it for a minute, and I was like, you know what, big part singing, let's go for it. Like, why not?
Versatile.
And I still am yeah, and I got the lead in as Tevye in Fiddler on
Nice.
the Roof, who's kind of the father of the family, sings tradition and If I Were a Rich Man, and I still am convinced to this day that I'm the only boy that wrote down big part singing. I'm convinced the all the other boys didn't, and that's why I got to do it. But I just remember that experience and trying even as a 10-year-old to say like, what is it like to have daughters
Mhm.
that are exciting me, disappointing me, right? It's a completely different
Yes.
experience, right? It was a Jewish story. I grew up in a Jewish community, but this person's story was so different than my
Yes.
own. And I think that definitely got me thinking about it a lot. And, growing up in Philadelphia, where I still live now, I think I grew up in Germantown in Northwest Philly, which is really a beautifully mixed
Love it.
neighborhood. And I always had like black and white neighbors and friends. And so I think getting to know my friends and their different experiences and different stories, I think was part of it as well. It's really individual connections, and then through theater, I think jumping into people's stories was always a way to feel
Yes, for
empathy.
sure. And I love that, right? And I say always say that that is a benefit I have as well growing up in New York City, right? In Brooklyn in public
Hmm.
school. It was a melting pot. I had friends from different race, culture all over. And I love the fact that earlier on in your journey, you were able not only to see empathy in your environment, but you were like, oh, wait, there's a moment here where I can be a character, kind of put on the body and the image of someone else and see how would I go about this, right? How will I be a father at 10, right, for this play? But it's
Yeah.
these artistic activities that stretch us and stretch our minds and our hearts to see how other
Mm.
people live, right? And for me, I always see empathy as how you would want to be treated at your lowest. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And just
Mhm.
always think
Yeah.
that there is another story. Everyone's dealing with something. And I think when we say empathy and being empathetic to one another, it's often difficult to verbally articulate, I should say. But I think it should be more easier to in physical form display what empathy looks like, right? Because I've like you're in corporate spaces doing improv, helping people work better together. How have you seen different signs of empathy, and what were some exercises that you're trying to invoke in them so that they not only understand where each other is coming from, but also understand the difficulties of each person's position on that team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in the workplace, it can be sometimes hard to bring our full selves and to bring our values and our experiences to the workplace. I think we oftentimes we all do forms of
Mhm.
code switching in our lives, and I think when we step into the workplace, especially a more corporate workplace, people can kind of put on one hat or leave the rest of themselves at home. So I often start my improv, team building and exercises trying to bring in more of people's selves. So a really simple activity that I love to do and I always encourage people is we get into a circle and we do an activity just called name an activity. So I ask everyone to think of one activity they love to do in their free time that's not related to
Mhm.
their work at all, right? So this could be playing chess, taking a nap, going fishing, whatever it is for you, and a way to physicalize it, to make it physical. And then we go around the circle and we each say our name and the activity acting it out. So I could say like Andrew chess and act out moving a chess piece, or Andrew walking my dog and act out walking my dog, and everyone repeats Andrew walking my dog. So we each hear and see and experience a small part of the other person's life and then repeat that out loud. And what I love about it so much is that it helps us to find connections between each other that may be completely unconnected to our
Yes.
work selves. Like, oh, I also love chess, or I also have a dog, and we should go on walks sometime on the weekend. Um, and it kind of gives a connection to people and associates something with them in a special way. And I think we can always learn more about the people in our lives and the people that we work
Yes.
with, right? And when we humanize ourselves more, it not only helps our relationships as individuals, but I think it helps the workplace because there's just more trust built in that when I get an email from Sanika next time, she's not just my boss or my coworker. she's also that friend who I know loves, painting on the weekends, and that's what I
Yep,
think about, right?
absolutely. Agree
Um,
100%.
yeah, there's this Jewish teaching that I love, this piece of wisdom from Pirkei Avot, which is a book of Jewish wisdom that says, Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam, which translates as, who is wise? One who learns from
Oh,
every person. And to me, that's really
yes.
connected to empathy because it's approaching every relationship in our lives as, I have something to learn from this person, whether you're meeting a stranger on the street or a kid or an adult, like, I have something to learn from them. And if you come from that place of curiosity and respect for the other person, I think like the empathy can grow through that
Absolutely. The
conversation.
empathy grows, the respect grows, right? And I love that you said that because in
Yeah.
my corporate spaces, I say that all the time that I can separate the human from the role. Right? Because often
Yeah.
sometimes we just see people as their role. What are they contributing to the project? What are they contributing to the organization? And when we separate those two things and start to see each other as humans, we'll realize that everyone, no one knows everything, right? No one knows everything. And actively being ready and willing to learn from one another. Because that to me, I think you put it perfectly, is a sign of empathy. Just always being in the posture to learn and also to respect each other as individuals separate from your actual title.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think just like so important to, yeah, to be able to separate those and to say there's going to be moments when we're interacting with each other fully in a, boss employee context, but we also can recognize the
Yes,
fuller
and the
person for
humanness
sure.
of
And I
it.
think, yeah, and the humanness of it. And what's beautiful about improv is that it is a leveler in some ways. When we're doing an improv scene together and we're creating something, we're all creating from scratch. So no matter if it's your first day on the job or you've been a CEO for 20 years, in this moment, you're both trying together, you're both scared, you're both fumbling and making it up together and supporting each other, right? So there's an element of um, everyone being in the same place in that moment, everyone having a beginner's
Yeah, for
mindset
sure.
for that.
Absolutely. And everyone being of one, which reminds me, it's so funny you said I was gonna say Bible verse, but actually as Jamaicans, something that we say is out of many, one people. Right? And it's just
Mm.
always reminds me that we can have many personalities, different experiences, but out of all of us, we are just one, right? Which also aligns with Christianity, right? Because I'm a believer of Christ and I love the Lord, and I feel like if Jesus taught us nothing, is to always see each other as a brother and a sister, like as a sibling, approach things with love, like, and I think some way somehow we lose that in these different spaces, in corporate spaces, and even when you're trying to go out in the world and find friendship and things like that, we always, in my perspective, have this posture of protection. And it's like,
Mm. Mm.
don't protect
Yeah.
something that already is, right? You are who you are. Just always lean into learning. And that to me is what empathy is. If you
Yeah.
approach every conversation, every room, ready to just show up as yourself, like you said, there is going to always be some form of code switching, some form of, I always say presentation, right? Because there are
Yeah.
levels to
Yeah.
your full self, but it also allows you to be empathetic to others because sometimes you can get too much in your head, and then it's like, how can I be empathetic when I'm standing here worried that someone's gonna think not ready for this meeting and that I was not prepared for this job? Like, how can you then be empathetic if you are so caught up with what's going on with yourself, right? So how have you helped people navigate like their internal, I don't know if insecurities is the right word, but their internal reservations
Mm.
to really show up? Like, that's the beauty of improv, right? It like forces you outside of yourself. But how have you done that?
Yeah. One of the ways that improv is so helpful, I think, connecting to what you were saying, is that it helps us to get out of our own head and focus on what the group needs, what the team needs, what the moment needs, more than our own personal desires or personal thoughts. So when we're learning how to improvise and learning on a team, your instructors will really focus you to think about what does the scene need? What does the story need? What does the show need? Rather than what do I, Andrew, want to do? What do I, Andrew, think would be funny or brilliant. We're trying to really shift our mindset and say, like, what does the team need? And when we're performing an improv scene or show, generally all the performers are like on the back line. So they're on the stage up top. And the reason is because they are ready to jump in at any moment whenever they can help, like whenever people need help, right? So there may be a two-person scene going on
Yeah.
between a mother and a son, and they mention, your cousin's always the one that's getting you into trouble. He's your bad influence. And one of the performers on the back line hears that and instantly like jumps in and says, "Hey, come on, let's go jumping off bridges," right? You become the cousin and help the scene. So you're thinking about like what will help the scene. And so we really try to use improv to help people think about what would that mindset shift or having that mindset in the workplace really do to shift your team. If you came into every meeting, to every interaction with your team saying like, what do they need? How
That's
can I
it.
help? Right? And there has to be a lot of trust there, a lot of safety there to be able to be a part of that team. So like one game I love to play to kind of build that sense of
Yes.
everyone has my back and to give people the focus that it's all about how we support people is a game called Speech, where we get into a circle and we take turns stepping into the middle and we say like speech, speech, speech. And the person in the middle has to say, I am sick and tired of, and then they pause because they don't get to decide what they're sick and tired of. Someone in the group suggests what they should give a speech about. So someone suggests my two rules to keep it on purpose is not
Okay.
people. So no
I can't say
people
I'm sick and tired of
in our
Bob.
group or celebrity. Yeah, yeah. You can't say I'm sick and tired of Bob, and not even like famous
Yes.
people or types of people. Not even like because like we're
Yes.
not trying to make it mean, and nothing like super complicated. Like not like I'm sick and tired of like capitalism, or I'm sick and tired of
Yes.
monogamy or something big. It's like I always say like just something a simple object. I'm sick and tired of pencils. I'm sick and tired of coffee. I'm sick and
Yes.
tired of trees. And then the person in the middle gives three reasons why they're sick and tired of trees.
Nice.
Like they're too tall, and everyone goes, "Yeah." And the leaves are always falling on my head. Yeah. And I ran into one once with my car. Yeah. It doesn't matter what the reasons are. I always tell the people it's about the radical support from the people around them. The
Mm.
game is actually about all the people on the outside of the circle saying, yeah, after each time they say something. And then how that feels when you're on the spot and you know that everyone in the circle is going to be cheering for you no matter how ridiculous the speech you give is, right? And what if that's the way we approached our ideas and our contributions at work, right? That people are going to support you, even if they think it's a silly idea at first. So, yeah, let's explore it. Like, like Sanika, I think this year for our company retreat, we should go to the aquarium. I think the aquarium's awesome. And instead of people saying, like, no, or that's for kids, or why would we do that? What if we just for a moment were like, yeah, okay, the
Yes.
aquarium, cool. Like, what sounds great to you about the aquarium, right? I think shifting that mindset of one of support and if people know anything about improv they probably know the
Mhm.
phrase yes and, which is not about saying yes to anything in the world, but it's about saying what if we can notice our instinct to say no, to shut things down, and try and just shift that to say yes at first and come back later, right? Even if it's a crazy idea, even if it's like I think we should charter a yacht and we should go on a yacht for our picnic this year instead of just going to the park, right? Our brains would instantly, right? If you and Sanika, if you and I were the bosses or in charge of it, we'd be like, we don't have the budget for that. That costs thousands of
We
dollars.
can't do that. Like,
We'd need all these
yes.
like permits, insurance. We can't do that, right? But what if for a moment we just said, okay, great. Like, tell me more about that idea. And maybe if we keep saying yes, we end up with like a yacht themed
Yes.
party in our conference room,
Yes.
right? Right? So like we might find the idea, but if we shut down the ideas too quickly, they never get to grow. So if we shift to supporting the ideas, and again, it's the empathy for other
Yes.
people's ideas of, you know, seeing them in a favorable light, saying like, I'm not going to judge you as a crazy person for saying a yacht. I'm going to say, okay, yes, like tell me about why the yacht. And they might say like, well, I just think like the fresh air is so awesome, and when you're like drinking a yacht, drinking on a yacht, and it's a dream of mine. Maybe we can say, all right, we're going to get
We're
some
gonna
fans and we're
recreate,
going to
that
put up some
Titanic
beautiful
moment for
posters.
you, maybe out of a window. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. We'll get a Titanic photo booth,
And
and
then
you can
the
be hanging
idea
off
gets
the yeah,
better, right?
exactly,
Because then
exactly.
everyone now starts to contribute
Right.
to just not that idea, but the overall feeling that we want to convey for this picnic. And I think you hit it right on the head, that sense of radical support, right? Because I think in both corporate
Mm.
spaces, your friendships, and in your family, I think what we are looking for is that support, and especially in corporate when you're like when you're trying to be your best. And like I ran a team before, I always tell
Mm-hmm.
people we are as good as our lowest performing team member. That is who we are. Like that is how well we are, because we don't all have to be at the same level of excellence and presentation, and you're building contracts and who's doing the right proposals, but we all support each other at the same level of intensity. When anyone stands up and has something to say or contribute to a project, I want everyone to be involved. I want everyone to be cheering them on, because we can learn from everyone's journey. So I love that radical sense of support that you like create, which again ultimately builds that internal empathy, right? For who that person is. Because the person who said like let's go on a yacht, everyone can be like, that's crazy. That makes absolutely no sense. But when you say yes, and you first validate their experience, right? And I
Mm.
think it's important that when we think about being
Yeah.
empathetic to one another and not starting with that no mentality, there is a sense of validation, not only for who they are, but what they've gone through, right? And just saying yes
Yeah.
and goes, all right, you see me, you hear me, let's make it better together. Let's make it better together, right? Because empathy is not only just I would say the soft moments, right? It's not just allowing someone to cry on your shoulder or being a listening ear. It's also allowing someone to become who they are in any opportunity, right? If it's a meeting, if it's a celebration, allowing someone to be feel free to be themselves around you is empathy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so important. And, one of the, again, Jewish concepts that I love is this idea of hakarat hatov, which is like celebrating the good or
Yes.
recognizing the good. And I think improv can be a great way to practice finding the
Mhm.
good in things, because when you're creating an improv scene, when you're coming up with things from scratch, there isn't really the time to focus on what's not working. You just have to be searching
Yes.
for what is working, right? In our lives, we spend a lot of our days, a lot of our times at work and at home talking about this meal was terrible, I didn't like this, this movie was terrible, waste of my time. But if we have the improv mindset, we have to be looking for what works. Because if we're doing an improv scene, we don't have time to pause and be like, oh, this joke isn't working or this relationship isn't working. We have to just be looking for what is working. What's the little nugget that's working? And so I think if we take that into our lives and into our relationships with other people, what if with other people in our workplace, instead of focusing on their weaknesses or the ways we don't like them, we said, what is each person on my team
That.
amazing at? Like what are they uniquely
That.
amazing at?
Absolutely
Yeah,
that.
and lifting that
Absolutely
up.
that. Because everyone has a significant amount of value to add to any conversation in every meeting. And it doesn't necessarily have to align with what you feel like is the best thing, but every single person has value. So I love that. Like it's kind of the saying of take the meat and leave the bones, right? When you are going through, and that's the beauty of like improv and performative arts that I think translate into real life, right? Because you can be presenting in a meeting or walking through a proposal, and you see that something is not resonating with your audience. Pivot. I do a lot of speaking engagements and
Yeah.
conferences, and there are things that rev up the crowd, and there are things that make the crowd think, and there are things that, they're not probably ready to dive into. It's too harsh, like transition moments. The ability to be ready to pivot and take what was working and evolve it and move it forward in real time, not only shows how you are actively engaged with your audience and the people you're talking to, it also acknowledges that you yourself are showing yourself empathy. That hey, that last sentence didn't work, so I'm going to keep moving.
Yeah.
That last presentation didn't work, so I'm going to keep moving. And that's the beauty of improv.
I'm going to forgive myself and move forward. Yeah. Well, you may know this story, Sanika, but one of my favorite stories about speaking, public speaking, and improvisation and pivoting is the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. was not planning on talking about having a
Yes.
dream on the
Yep.
Washington Mall.
I'm gonna let you
Do you
tell
know
it.
this
I'm gonna
story? Have
let
you
you
heard
tell it,
this?
but I
Yeah.
love this story. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, there are whole books and documentaries about this from the people who were there, but essentially he had written and rewritten this long speech. You know, he was obviously an incredible, one of the greatest speakers in American history and had given thousands of speeches. But the speech that he had planned for that day was didn't have the words "I have a dream" in the speech. It was about how America's written a promissory note to the black population, and it hasn't been cashed. And it
Yeah.
was like a intellectual idea, and I think a smart idea, but it wasn't resonating with people. And he was feeling that, and Mahalia Jackson, who was a singer who was often with him at these concerts, she also felt that it wasn't working. She was feeling that like it wasn't working, and so she like yelled like, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And she was remembering nuggets of speeches he had given at other times about this idea of having a dream, and he kind of pauses, and in that moment, in front of
Yes.
I think it was
Yeah.
500,000 people in
Yep.
person and millions on the TV, he pivots and he starts talking about having a dream, and some of that was written before and some of it was improvised or expounded upon. But I think just showing me how incredibly important it is, no matter what level of speaking you're at and no matter how big the audience, you have to stay in the moment and be ready to pivot and improvise. Because imagine if he had just said, you know what, no, I have to stick with what I wrote. I'm not going to go off script. I'm not going to do that. Right? We may never have heard that speech. He may never have given that speech in that context where it meant so much. So I always think like if he can improvise in that moment,
Exactly. In whatever
you can
moment we
improvise in whatever speech you're giving, right? Because you are never going to give
exactly,
a
and in
speech as
such
big
a
as that
large
one, you
audience,
know?
and it's also that going back to that empathy
Right.
of him trusting his gut. He knew, like, I too have watched all the
Yeah.
documentaries, and I always felt like he there was something in his gut that said, I can do this, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to improvise, and I'm going to picture the I am going to articulate the dream in which I know, the dream in which I believe in, and in front of this large audience, which is totally not what I planned on talking about. And look how
Right. And his trust of Mahalia Jackson in that moment, his empathy towards her to say, maybe she knows more than I do. Maybe she's got the right idea, right? Like, amazing. Because I think we often, too, like with people like Martin Luther King or, you know, other people that we idolize or speakers, we often put them on a pedestal and then forget that they have so many people in their corner,
yes,
right? And they are part of a movement and a world of people to celebrate that no one is doing anything amazing by
it is part
themselves,
of the
right? And
collective.
so,
It is part of
yeah,
that
giving that
team of
empathy and
people
credit.
that you
Yeah,
put together that believe in
right.
what you believe in, that are aligned with the purposes that you are aligned with. That and then it's similar to like this conversation, right? I'm a Christian, you're a Jewish, and we can have this conversation. We have so many similarities in how we see life and how we live life, and just understanding that you having people around you that you trust, that radical sense of support, is how greatness is built. And it reminds me actually
Yeah.
of Barack Obama. I read his book, and did you know Barack Obama actually used to be a bad speaker?
Hmm.
Did you know that? Like he would speak, yeah, he would speak too quickly.
Hmm. No.
He would speak too quickly. He was too pointed,
Mm-hmm.
and his whole team told him one day, like he was going to town halls and was like, "You need to speak slower. You need to speak slower. You need to know exactly what you want to say in your head before you say it." And it was very heartwarming for me, who speaks a lot, but always, there's always room for improvement. That he had to teach himself to slow
Yeah.
down in his communication so that it resonated with people. People would tell him how charming he was in conversation, but when he got up to speak, it was too quick. They would lose him in all of his ideas. Right? And over time, his
Right.
team kept,
Right.
like, they did workshops with him. He started doing town halls with slower speaking, shorter points. And that's how he got great. So you bring up the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech reminded me of those moments when I read in the Barack Obama book about him being a good, like, he would connect with the people, but people would walk away not knowing exactly what he said because he said so much. Right? It was rapid fire, and so it
Right.
wouldn't resonate. And then trusting in that radical sense of support, the people around him having empathy, not only to who he was, but what he was trying to do, and why his speech was so quick, and why it was so passionate, and why he just always felt like he had to hit it. If I got 2 minutes, I'm going to hit it in 2 minutes. And they had to tell him that trying to hit all those points in 2 minutes actually loses all of the points.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we all often try and do too much
Yes.
when we're speaking or writing. Um, one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes is, and he has many, but was him writing to someone and saying, "I'm sorry this letter is so long, but I didn't have time to make it shorter." And that acknowledges to me what's true, right? Which is that it's like easier to write 10 pages than it is to write 10 lines that convey that idea. That actually takes a
And
lot of
thought and like
effort, right? To
yes, and to
to
slow
get
down
that to
and be
think.
able to
Yeah.
properly articulate what you're feeling and what you desire out of the conversation. And I think as we move through life trying to show each other
Yeah.
empathy, that's a key thing that the audience can take away. It's just slowing down in general, right? In general, allows you to be present
Yeah.
in the moment and actually respond in the way that you'd like to. Right? That's why I love improv because while improv is quick and you have to be ready and you're on your feet, it actually teaches you the muscle of being present. Because you can't be an empathetic person without being present in the moment. And often we're just running through life, right? We're just like we have tasks to complete, jobs to do, and we're running through life. But how can you be that radical sense of support and show empathy not only to yourself but the people around you that you love as well as like the spaces you occupy if you're not present?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being present, and I'm curious for you, Sanika, because as we were going into this conversation thinking about empathy, I was also thinking about, our differences being Jewish and Christian and our backgrounds in that way, and also being, black and white, and how living in
Nice.
Philadelphia, and I actually lived in New York for 11 years after college. That's where I really studied improvisation. I know you are. You know, I struggle with in our cities, like in Philadelphia in particular, that I know the best, but I think I experience this in New York too, is that we are surrounded by a diversity of people, and yet we can still be siloed in our lives. We can still be siloed in our friend groups, in our workplace groups, in our neighborhoods, right? And it's so challenging to break through that. And I think that so much of empathy for me is about being present to the people in our lives, in our neighborhoods, on our block, our neighbors, to get to know each other because that's the way that we kind of break down these walls and assumptions. I really feel like all hatred is based on not knowing people and therefore making generalizations about
100%.
people, right? And I think um,
Yes.
a struggle in America today, I think, for me is that, like, when I was growing up, I think a lot of people
Hmm.
were struggling with people with LGBTQ identities, queer people, and a lot of it came down to a lot of people weren't comfortable being out, so people didn't have good friends, good family members that they thought about. But I think now in 2025, I hope most of us have some or
Yes.
many people in our lives who identify as queer who so that when someone says
We're
something
like,
about someone in the LGBTQ community, that's not a general
yes,
statement to that. That's you're attacking my cousin, you're
absolutely.
attacking my sister, you're attacking my friend. Um, and I think that's so important. And so, I feel like in Philadelphia, I don't know how you feel in New York, but there's still so much of a
Yes.
divide between like the white and black populations that I try and break down with relationships in my neighborhood. And I work a lot with the church in the neighborhood who hosts our community meetings. I started a community group to bring people together. But I'm curious for you, Sneak, like how you feel things are in New York and in your communities and how you try and
Same.
build
I
that
think it
empathy.
starts from fair, if I'm honest. I think the bridging of communities start from fair. I think everyone feels that they're not going to understand. They're not going to understand me. They're white, I'm black, I'm a woman, this is a guy, they're not going to understand me. And I always like to articulate that that's coming
Yeah.
from a place of fear or of a bad experience, right? And that's where I lean in. I'm super empathetic.
Hmm.
Like, tell me, why have you had that experience? And I've learned that I've had such a unique upbringing because, again, I went to public school in Brooklyn. One of my first best friends was a white girl. Her name was Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Like, and it's ridiculous to say you don't see race because like race, ethnicity, it all is there and it's very transparent. But I've just always had friends across the gambit because of the relationships, right? But in our community, I do still see those silos. And I'm always the one that's like, why? Like, why can't we just go to this club or let's go to this restaurant? Not because there's not a bunch of black people there. We will be the first sense of black people that go there, And I know it stems from fear. And I know it stems from having sometimes bad experiences, but I'm always leaning in when I'm like,
Yeah.
be more empathetic because you don't know the experiences that one person had. And you can't judge a slew of people based on one experience. Just like I don't want to be judged for being a black woman, I don't want to judge anyone for just being a white guy. Like, you understand what I mean? Like, because we're so much more than that. We're so much more than that. So, while I do see those silos, I also have
Yeah.
pockets of friends that don't care. Like, you know what I mean? And my personal friendship circle goes across the whole gamut. I have family members that's part of the LGBTQ club. I have friends that's part of the LGBTQ plus community. I have friends of all different races and religions, right? Because I just think as human beings, there's so much we can
Yeah.
learn from each other. There is so much I have learned from human beings that I could have never learned if I just stuck in my own blocks and was like, I only speak to black people because that I only speak to Caribbean people because that's the people who know me and understand me. But I do think it stems from a place of fear. And that's why I think leaning in and showing a sense of empathy for not just who they are, but their experiences
Yeah.
is how we bridge the gap, right? Making it okay to say, I've had such a horrible experience with this one person. And that's what I would
Yeah.
personally love. I'd love if we would articulate, even if we had racist interactions, and or just horrible experiences in different communities, that it was articulated as that person, not people, right? Because
Yeah.
that's ultimately what it is. People have bad experiences with
Mhm.
other individuals and they
Right.
make these generalizations of who you are and what they are, which is not fair. I just don't think it's fair to anyone because I remember I was in college and we were doing a project. I've always loved marketing communications. And as you can tell, I'm a talker and I'm just like all the things. And it was this white boy, and he was just like, are you ever afraid to do this? And I was like, do what? He was like, be amongst like all of us. Because to be fair, I was probably like the second or third black person there. Like it was like a room of like over 50 people. And I was like the second or third black person. He was like, are you
Mm.
like afraid? I just want you to know like you have my support. And I thought that was so sweet. I remember having a whole conversation, and he later transferred to a different school because I went to school in Brooklyn. So he later transferred, and I remember saying to him how beautiful what he just did was. I was like, thank you so much. I appreciate that you saw the difference in the room. And my response was no. I was like, I learned a long time ago, I can't hide. So I'm very much okay, but I appreciate that you understand that there are people that look like me that are not comfortable when we are only one or two in the room. Right? And it's that empathy piece. I think it's the piece of just being more empathetic to everyone's experience in this world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because everyone
Yeah.
unfortunately has had both good and bad experiences. And sometimes when the bad experiences overweigh the good ones, it becomes those people. And I've been in many conversations when they're like, "Oh, Sanika," and I'm like, "Cause it's not those people. It's that person. That is someone's son, father, daughter. Like that one person had no integrity. That one person was wrong." But we can't. Just like again, I don't want anyone to say black women are like X because you came across Sanika. Because I am not a representation of every single black woman in the world. What I am is a representation of Sanika. So that to me is how our communities are
Yeah.
will over time become one, right? Leaning
Yeah.
in and being more empathetic and understanding that if we acknowledge everyone's experience, both good and bad, and be more empathetic to their reservations, that's how we draw closer and closer together. Because I think often people want to dismiss the sides that are uncomfortable, to be quite honest, right? Like it's too hard to talk about, it's too hard to be a part of, and it's like, can we not talk about it? And which is so
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
because in a way, the Caribbean culture has taken that on and made it its own. Because in the Caribbean culture, if some incident or there was a conversation or something happened with family or friends that left some, unsettled feelings, instead of sitting down and addressing those feelings head on, they'll just ignore it. They'll won't talk for
Mm.
2 weeks, a week or two. They'll ignore it, and then like around a holiday or a month later, they're like, "Hey, haven't seen you. How are you?" And just kind of I call it the robot through. Are you doing fine? Are you doing good? Are we good? Yeah. Can we just move forward and just we don't need to talk about that. And that to me is so detrimental. Like it's so toxic in its format, and I don't allow people to do it. I'm like, absolutely not. We are going to have a conversation of what happened, how you felt, and how you made me feel. We're going to show each other empathy throughout the situation, and then we can move forward. I just don't believe in walking around with rugs that have a bunch of stuff stuffed under it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's I think it's a coping mechanism, and different people deal with their conflict in different ways. But yeah, no, really interesting to hear what you're saying, and I think for me it comes back to empathy being about curiosity, and recognizing that it is not evil. It's very human to like start to try and generalize or assume about people, because when we operate in the universe, we don't want to always be unsure about things, right? Like when I make my cereal, I want to know like I've got that kind of cereal and that kind of milk. I'm not making a decision about that. That's just happening, right? And the problem
Yep,
is when we get into that with other people, right? And we
exactly.
like meet
Box
Sanika, and
checked.
I'm like, "Oh, I know you, Sanika, already. I got a friend. I think you're similar to this friend." Done curiosity, right? And um box checked, exactly. And it's just very easy to fall into that. I think it's very human. It's lazy, but it's also just very human, and we need to have empathy for ourselves when that happens. But um, to recognize that is so important, and I think to challenge ourselves to yeah to get to know everyone individually and not see them as different. I
Nice.
think growing up in my family, my mother's Jewish, my father's Christian. He was raised Christian in Texas, and he's kind of the only one that left Texas. So my dad's half of the family is all down in Texas, and so visiting them, it was always interesting to see, like, okay, we'd go to church with them and see what Christmas was like and what songs they sang and celebrated. And it's just interesting to see when you join another community, like the songs that everyone knows that you've never heard of, right? The rituals that everyone knows that you've never heard of, and so fascinating. I was talking to a friend the other day about how they went to their first Jewish wedding, and like seeing the different rituals was like so interesting. And I think if we have curiosity about each other's differences and cultures, it can be so exciting. And I think, like you said, not dismissing the negative pieces and the negative experiences and the trauma and the bad treatment that we've had, but finding a balance for ourselves with the good in that. I
Yeah.
remember, in terms of anti-Semitism, in high school, I was on the cross country team, and I remember running against another team and them throwing pennies at us at
Wow.
our feet, and how upsetting that was. Accusing us of
People, yeah,
being
uh-huh.
money hungry Jews. Um, and it was a particular one group of a few boys at one private school,
Yeah,
um, and was upsetting, and is not the general experience that I've had. And I think that it's important again to like take everyone on their own merits. And I think even in when we have difficult conversations and when we get into politics, sometimes we also can assume we know what people mean by certain words instead of having curiosity about like, what do you mean by that, right? When you talk about this, what do you mean? Um,
yes,
in the Jewish community, for us, a lot of arguments and conversations within and without our community about Israel Palestine and what's going on there, and being curious about people's language, being empathetic to people's experiences, and not assuming
that
we know
part.
what they mean can be so hard. And sometimes the more you know about something, the more you're like, I know what you mean, and you're wrong, or like you're evil. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and just so important to stay curious. I mean, one other just piece um, from the Torah, from the Hebrew Bible, that I think about is that in those books, there's the commandment to love the
Oh,
stranger
yeah.
appears 36 times, more than any other commandment in the entire Old Testament,
Yes.
the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible. And they say it's because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So you need to always love the stranger, right? And I think for me, at our best, I feel as a Jewish community, we recognize that we have long been a minority, persecuted, the
The
stranger,
stranger.
mistreated, and that should make us notice and try to always look out for the stranger and who doesn't have power, who is being mistreated. Um, and with the
Yes.
kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric that we're experiencing in America right now, I think about my ancestors
Yeah.
and their
Yeah.
immigration stories,
Yes.
and that it's always the same stereotypes and evil things put onto the group du jour, the group of the moment. It's the same stereotypes, and we need to fight against that. And it's like so important again to have that empathy. And I
Yes.
think um, yeah, and I think it goes back to for me like starting with our
Yes. And
circle
just
and our neighbors and like anyone listening. I'm just like if you want to be more empathetic, just introduce yourself to one neighbor this week, and get to know
and
one
say,
neighbor
hi,
you
my
don't know.
name is, right? Because like you said, that
Yeah.
to me, that passive, it's, you said so much there. And I wanted to, like, that's one of the main reasons I created this podcast, right? It's one, to loudly say how we have defined things can be different for me as an individual in various stages of my life. And then how is that divine definition aligned with who I am? What happened to agreeing to disagree? I feel like at one point we were all so
Yeah.
open to agreeing to disagree with someone's thought or perspective on a topic. And it was separate, right? It was separate from the human being. It was like, oh, I think it's rainy today. And you're like, oh, it's not raining. It's just drizzling, Sanika. And that we agreed to disagree. It wasn't, Sanika, you're an idiot. I just like, you know what I mean? Now my character and my
Yeah.
morality and everyone is into question
Right.
because
Right.
we disagree on a topic that, by the way, we both may feel very different about in a day or two. Because based on information, like you yourself, your definitions and your perspectives on things change over the course of your life. Why tear other people down because that perspective is different? It's one of the main reasons I created this podcast, because of the level of diversity, division that I saw in the space. It was just let's be angry at one another because we don't agree the same thing, right? Let's
Mm.
label each other. And while there's so much comfort in saying like, oh, I have a friend who looked like this,
Mm.
I work with a person who looked like you, boom, checked off. I know what kind of person you are. We have to acknowledge that that is very passive behavior, and we would hate if anyone would do that to us. Cause and I always
Yeah.
remind someone of that. Like, you can look like the Jewish guy I work with. That doesn't mean Andrew and David is the same person. Like, that does, and I don't, and you understand what, and I personally don't even
Yeah.
think of Andrew and
Yeah.
David as the same person. And that's what makes me think my upbringing was, I think sometimes that I'm weird because I was like, but
Right.
there was a bunch of kids in that class. Because in elementary school, we learned how to dreidel. We learned about Yom Kippur. We did Chinese New Year. Like, I know about all the Muslim holidays. Like, this was every single month
Yeah.
at school and elementary school,
Yeah.
PS 91 in Brooklyn. Like, throughout my academic career as a
Right.
child here in New York City, us being coming from different cultures, different religions, looking different was something that we celebrated. I remember every month we would have it was called like you plus me. So we would have to get on stage in the middle on the auditorium and tell about our culture
Hmm.
and then how it can help your culture. And then like the whole class. So like the class stood up on the side and I would have to go and I'd go, Sanika, I'm
Hmm.
Jamaican and I'm black and mixed with Cuban. My culture can do da, and then you walk off. And then the next person was like, I'm Chinese. We can do da, and then you walked off. And then but we did it class by class. And then everyone had to do a project about what you learned from each other. Like, it was just so much fun and curiosity and collaboration. So, kind of growing up, going to college
That's
and
great.
entering the corporate world and seeing how other people thought was still to this day very weird to me. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's very, I wouldn't say uncomfortable. It makes me weep for them, if I'm honest. I'm so, and like people that I come across that's like hard
Yeah.
grained in their
Yeah.
ways and what they think immigrants are and all of these things, I honestly weep for you. Like to me, I'm so empathetic. I don't get mad because I really feel like people only know what they know. And unless an individual opens up to want to know more, they'll only know what they know. Right? So it's like trying to convince a wall it needs water. You know, unless it opens
Yeah.
up, it can't get it. So how I always just weep for them because
Right.
I'm just like, you don't know how great life could be if you if you were amongst everyone. You don't know how beautiful life is unless you have people of different cultures. Like, have you attended a Muslim wedding? It's freaking amazing. Have you attended an African wedding? OMG. Like, you know what, like it's just so, I'm like, have you had the Yom Kippur cookies? They are good. Like, these are things that I just feel like it's your choice. It is a choice. And we have to stop living life so passively and expecting to live life fully. It's not how it works. There are people that live and die every single day and never lived a day in their life.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna be passive and say like, I saw this black woman, she's like this
Yeah.
black woman, I know I don't want to
Yeah.
engage. You just missed an opportunity to find a friend that can help you. Like, you know what I mean? Same thing. Like, if we just see people for their race and their religion, there's so much missed opportunity for
Yeah.
happiness. Outside of learning, there's so much happiness and collaboration. And to me, I'm always chasing happiness and safety. So I weep for them if I'm honest. So that's why to me my community is so mixed because I have such a good time. Genuinely and sincerely, like I have two daughters, we like, and my husband,
Yeah.
we our whole village is so mixed because we have such a good time learning from each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my friend who's Korean and she's a pastry chef. And I love me some pastries. She doesn't bake for me anymore because I love too many pastries. But we talk so much about Korean
Mhm.
culture and like there are so many
Mhm.
similarities in cultures once you get to know people. Like, you know, the overbearing parent that thinks you should be married or a doctor. Like, there are so many there are so many similarities that we can laugh on and love on each other and give each other that
Yeah.
radical sense of support for that are missed opportunities because we want to live life passively based on generalization.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think you're right. And, folks who don't have that empathy or who are harboring the opposite, like hatred, I would say, as you said, like it's you just feel bad for people because it's always self-destructive too, right? There's no one who's filled with hate who is then happily sitting at home, playing Monopoly with their kids and not thinking about anything, right? If you have so much um hatred or worry in your head or in your heart, it takes up so much more space for you, right? And I always feel
Oh,
that
the
feeling of whenever
labels,
you
the
hear someone
labels.
generalize about
Oh,
other people, it's like it's because they don't know them, like liberals are like this or conservatives are like this. It's like because you don't know. Yeah, the labels. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. I had this idea for a project which I never followed through on because I have more ideas than time to do them as we all do, but it was I wanted to have a like just like a little stand, kind of like a lemonade stand and either do like lunch or lemonade with a liberal. And I would set it up in a like very conservative area, either a conservative neighborhood or town, and that was it. And I would just sit there, and if you wanted to have lunch or lemonade with me, you could come on over and do it. And I wouldn't even bring up politics, anything political, unless you wanted to talk politics. But just so that people who didn't have in their personal life a liberal friend, you could talk to me, and
Yes.
I'll be your liberal friend, and I'll be friendly. And if you want to ask questions like, whatever, some assumption, Andrew, why do you hate this, or why do you think this? I'm happy to answer, but also we can just be
Mhm.
friends and even not talk about politics because I think we do end up in our silos. For me, as I'm saying, like I'm pretty liberal on political issues, and you have an election, and I think, wow, like half the country voted for
Yep.
Trump, right? And I can probably put on my hands the number of people I know in my life who I'm sure voted for Trump, right? Who knows? Um, but if I knew 100 people, right? I know there's like lots of good people. I have a couple specific people in my life who I think about and are just amazingly generous, warm, incredible people who voted for someone that I completely disagree with on most things. And so I won't generalize about people because I'm thinking about that person, right? So that's the other thing too is like anyone that's listening and thinking, yeah, but come on, Andrew, like these
No,
people are like that. You know, liberals are all like this or Republicans are all like that. I'm like, no, but like challenge yourself to like make a friend and break that down because
it's
like
not
that's
true.
not
And realize that it's
whatever you're
not real. Like,
generalizing is
and
not
that's the
true.
part that
Yeah.
always
So,
gets me. I'm just like, again, realize that what
yeah.
generalization, whatever box you created that comforts you, right? That makes your hate justified, understand that it's not real. Like, it's not
Yeah.
based on actual facts. It is based on the opinions and the stories that you created to comfort yourself. And that's where, to me, I'm always, again, I feel bad for them. That's really honestly and truthfully where I sit, because hatred comes from a place of fear. Somewhere deep down, or probably right in front of your face, you're afraid of something. You're afraid that this person might be smarter than you. This person might get ahead than you. Like, you're afraid. That's all hatred is, fear amplified. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of self courage and
Mhm.
self
Yeah.
accountability to move past fear. That's why it's easy to be like, yeah, it's the immigrants taking all the jobs, or whatever crazy rhetoric is this week. It's like, you too can go out and get a job. Like, no one's stopping you. Like, there are no barriers in your way to get what you want. And if there
Mm.
are, call out the barriers. How is it the people? I'm sure there's not someone like kicking you out the door saying, "No, you can't get this
Yeah.
job. I'm here first." That's not how that works. But unfortunately, I think it's the comforting of the fear, right? You create these stories, and there are messages and things out there that comfort you, because ultimately, in order for you to move past hate, you have to be willing to tap into intelligence, right? Like, you have to. There's no like, and there's no way you can be filled with hate and say like, I'm also super smart. Really? Because intelligence is aligned with a great deal of curiosity. Like you were talking
Yeah.
about, like with Trump and Trump voters, there is, I think the book is called Master of Communication. If not, I'm gonna put it in the notes of this, but the book was amazing, right? It's basically about how people are able to communicate with one another regardless of what side of the argument that they're on. I read it right after I read like the negotiation books. I like these books. I'm a happy little nerd, Andrew. Exposing myself, right? But ultimately, what they did was create, it wasn't like a
Yeah.
test group. They invited all of these political talking heads, right? Just commentators, even legislators, to a room that had opposing opinions about the rights to bear arms, right? They brought them all to the room. No one knew who was coming to the meeting. So when everyone got to the meeting, and I'm paraphrasing the story to get to it, but when everyone got to the room, they all came together and
Mm.
realized who each other was, right? So they made the assumption that they were going to talk about the right to bear arms. And then the person running the room asked a very personal question about like something like, when last you lost someone you loved? And everyone started sharing stories of like someone in their family that they lost for different reasons, sicknesses or whatever.
Mm.
And they just kept asking them personal questions about similar experiences. When's the last time someone you love disappointed you? Like, these were the questions that they were asking in the room, right? So as they continue to have these conversations and pose the question to the group, and they keep talking and they're sharing these very vulnerable moments about themselves.
Mm.
The next day, they said, "So, what about the right to bear arms?" The conversation was significantly different because they spent the day before learning about who each other was, not what their stance on the topic was. But so when I say it's a beautiful book. I'm definitely going to put it in the notes, but it just also
Mm.
shows that when you take the topic off the table, whatever it is, we can disagree. And that's why I always say that we make politics and all these things so much bigger than, while it impacts a lot of people. So I'm not going to negate that it's not a big topic, but we need to separate the topic from the people, right? And
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we need to disagree without hating each other, you know? Yeah. That comes
Because
down to that.
and that's the part that's crazy. I feel like it has happened now over the last decade. I just don't feel like it's always been this way. Maybe I was just naive or maybe I'm just too young. I never felt it was this way, especially in New York politics. Like there were people that were actively disagreeing on issues and found a middle ground.
And I think yeah, and I think so much of it too is and in that story is about gathering face to face and talking like we are, right? That I think with the internet and social media and technology, we all hoped it would bring a utopia, but what it brought was human beings online in our complicated selves. And what I often see from, you know, political comments on a national YouTube video down to like a neighborhood Facebook group that's just for like my 10 blocks is that people will be really vitriolic and hateful in a way that I don't think they ever would to another person's face. And I often think that we allow ourselves to speak in a way that we don't face to face, something that I would never say to your face. And I always, I made a rule for myself with like emails and texts to never write something digitally angry. I'm not writing it down angry because something that we write, whether it's in a text to a friend or an email or a Facebook post, that is both in the moment and permanent, completely permanent, right?
Yes.
That exists forever.
Yes.
And you could say something harmful to your partner, to your kid, to your neighbor in a moment of anger that you can never take back and that they might be frustrated with forever. And I think that it's important that we not, you know, it's good to have anger. It's a very natural emotion, but let's tell people I'm angry at you. I want to talk, and let's talk, right? And
That
let's
part.
talk face to
That
face.
part.
But I think it's easier, and like you're saying, it's fear. We have a fear of that conversation. So instead, it's easier to just be like, "I hate you," or "You're full of hate," or "You're a Nazi," or whatever slur we want to put on each other. Um, and it's awful to see. And I think that in the face to face, we can really get to know each other and break that down. But it's hard. So I think
But
it's
I feel
yeah,
like honestly it's been amplified a lot due to loneliness, if I'm
yeah,
honest. I
absolutely.
feel like it has been amplified a lot. I think the residue of COVID still
Mm,
lives very heavily in today's culture,
yeah,
right? And what people don't understand, unfortunately, like people are rewarded for negative behavior online.
right.
That's just
Sometimes
the
for sure.
honest,
Yeah,
that's the facts of the matter, right?
because the
And
software doesn't care.
sometimes
They just want views and clicks. So if that it doesn't matter to
they
them
just
if
want
it's good or
engagement.
bad. Yeah, they just want engagement. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. And unfortunately, when people are festered and they're filled with fear and they're lonely, there is not a large demand for people to be like, oh, you're valued, you're worthy. Like those conversations aren't as loud as the I'm gonna go on a blog and say something mean in an effort to get someone to respond back to me. And
Yeah.
like, you know, like because that's what ended up happening. It's rewarded behavior. It's interesting to see a fact run against an opinion, right? On a a one-on-one man race, just like how we used to do as kids, right? On the street, you take one corner, and who gets to the next corner first? A fact can never outrun
Mhm.
a lie. It's just it can't because unfortunately, especially online, the lie has so many more cheers. There are so many more people on the sideline like it's more exciting. What else? What did you say? What did they do? Like, it's just unfortunately, it's just so it
Yeah.
it commands more attention. And ultimately, that's what they want. They want attention because they're fearful. And that's where I just lean in with empathy. I'm just like, what
Yeah.
is this really about? And you have to be super intentional about identifying what's the goal of this interaction. Like, what do I want from this? Because often there's been so many situations, and this kind of one of the reasons again I decided to create the podcast where people will come up to me or I'll be in a situation and I'll see it for what it is. And I'm like, but what are you really angry about? Like, I know that this is, let's just say, the
Right.
proposal or the contract we're talking about, but all that aside, what is really bothering you? How can I help this be better, not just on paper, but in overall? And that's when you get to the real conversation, by showing each other empathy and being present and showing that I genuinely and sincerely care about human beings. And I don't want anyone to be in, not only in my space, but in my community, feeling like they are worth nothing, like no one cares about you, that because you look a certain way or because you speak a certain way, right? Or you have a different accent, or because you don't speak proper English, that you are of any less value than anybody else in this community, because that is not the truth. It's just the facts of the matter. And I always say it's not about what I feel. I'm a person who operates in facts and numbers. It's not the truth. You have value because you are as substantial as I am substantial, factually, right? So how, like, it's just leaning in and showing each other that level of empathy and that level of being present and slowing down and not living life passively is what it's all about. Andrew, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. It has fed me tremendously, and I hope you really enjoyed, and I hope our audience enjoyed, right? Because how we come to define these things that truly drive our lives and who we are, such as empathy, is not an easy thing, but it's worth the journey.
Yeah, absolutely, Sneeka. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and like you said, I hope listeners also feel empathy towards each other and their family and their neighbors, and we can keep spreading it around the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is How Do You Divine Empathy?